Thank you very much for a thought-provoking talk. And I think we have time for some questions. Yeah, I thought so. So the first one will be Leo.
So thank you for your excellent summary on values. So when you design a self-driving car, then you take out data how people drive. You ask about where are the values coming. They're actually coming from the average driver. The problem in that is that some drivers go against the red lights, and then you would not like to have your AI system to drive the car against red lights like human people do. So there's quite a lot of curating about figuring out how to change that value that people usually have in order something that we would make it. Another question about values is when you have a training system from ICU, so internal care unit, and then you look at, for example, you try to figure out, recommend when you stop the treatment because the kind of a situation for the person is too hard, they will die anyway, whatever you do. So in that kind of a situation, you can train the system according to previous decisions of doctors in how you would today, because you know essentially who dies and who did it, who make it. So you can make a prediction on that. Then exactly as you said, there is a value that is in place. And that one, what makes it a little problematic is that when the doctor decides that you are going to die and they recommend that you wouldn't be treated anymore, then the patient dies, whether it could have a probability of surviving. So what you are training the system on is actually on the doctor's opinion. So you were asking where the value is coming. So it comes from the doctor that were used to actually to train the system.
Yeah.
So these are kind of a good points in exactly how you take it in on how. So data is not without values.
No, exactly.
So they contain the attitudes of the system that is created them. Yeah. So I totally agree. You should be knowledgeable about that. So in a sense, how it comes in and how it goes on systems.
Thank you. It's perfect, but there is another layer of values there, and which you say,
yes,
you don't count me as a good driver, so you discount me from the data. And someone is doing that, and that's also important to know.
And there's also the drivers about this kind of when you build the system. And I think that transparency, if you think that as a value, it is most about looking at who are the stakeholders who are building the system. It is nothing to do about transparency of the algorithm. It is actually about figuring out who were pushing you to do something. If it does, and if that is open and it is open in around, you make it as a part of your model and say that these were the kind of items, how it was built, and this was the goals that it was built onto. So this should be included in the system, and this is very good comment from you in setting how to drive it forward.
And you remember when the robotic surgeons came operating on prostate cancer. I don't know, you might know if they were trained the same way as you said, but then we had his studies showing that the best doctors were far better than the robots. And then of course they had trained on, so it's a value, which one where you
when
use.
Da Vinci came, so it is type of a robot, so it is doing, but it is not actually, it's a kind of telemedicine system. So it's always
but that was
so that is there is no robot that actually would do that alone. So all of the systems currently, it's so that there's a robot, there's a system that is giving you an extra hand. Which is because it's very hard to actually operate in certain situations. You are sitting in the same room, you are using these handles which you use, and then you are right. Some doctors may be better at actually using the skill of a knife when they actually kind of touch the flesh themselves, rather than have this kind of a mechanism that is doing that in the sense. Yes, but I have seen some robots that actually can do the stitching. So that is how far we are. So if you have a wound, they can close it. Yes, okay, I don't spend more time. So I will have more comments. So.
Thank you. Oh, you have more comments?
I could have, yes.
Okay.
Go for it.
Someone else's question? Yes.
Yes, thank you. Well, I had 2 points. The first one has been partially addressed already, but it had to do with values, because you insisted on the question of whose values are incorporated in what the autonomous car does, for example. And maybe no individual has the exact values, right? So it's nobody's values, but still there might be values that we can infer from the way the system operates, that it's, you know, there are some values behind whatever it does, if we're going to call it decisions. And then these might reflect just the outcome of various processes over a long time of different people discussing different problems and fiddling with the system and so on and so forth, coming from different stakeholders, different companies and government agencies, whatever. But no individual has these values. So it's not the values in the sense that we're used to talking about, I trust you because I sort of have an insight into your values. So that's one sort of tricky thing about asking the question, whose values does the autonomous car have? But my second question is about the remark you made toward the end about patient autonomy, where you were comparing sort of the situation where a human doctor gives a recommendation and the patient, based on that, makes a decision. And then you said, well, with the AI, the patient doesn't really understand where the recommendation is coming from or what it's based on, and therefore the patient cannot make an autonomous decision. I agree with the second part, but I'm wondering if the first part is correct, is realistic. I mean, do patients really know or understand where the recommendations are coming from, what they're based on? Even in the case of human doctors, isn't it more like maybe they trust the face or the tone of voice or whatever it is about? Right, so those are my questions.
I think that what you say about the first point you are making about the values lying behind in the future some sort of robotic surgeons or the self-driving car, it will not move a meter, which is my point, without values. So someone has to add values so it can come to crossroad and go left instead of right. And that's value. So for me, and if I go to doctor, it is of course important that I take this decision to go through a surgery or do something. And then of course, I want to add my values. But the doctor will of course give me recommendations based on his scientific or her scientific expertise, their proven experience, and there are values hidden there too. For me, it's of course important that I can sort of detect if there are some value discrepancies here and why there are differences in our how we see the situation and how I might just say to him, I don't want one more cancer treatment. It's enough. It has been too hard. So I just want palliative care or something like that. But I wait for that day that I can have this conversation with an artificial intelligence built in India, programmed in China, then sent to the United States to be Apple compatible, and then starting to talk to me. There is a problem about the values there. It will be a cultural mix, and I don't know which part is Chinese and which part is American, but Leo looks at me.
Even in Sweden, I believe that there are people who have coming from Chinese origin and they would like to have a Chinese advice.
Yes, of course.
So then I don't know whether this is such a big problem. You have to take into account all the kind of moralities that you have people that are coming into the system.
But
so
I didn't mean that. I just meant there might be a mix of values that are put into a system.
Yes. And it
during the process,
yes,
when it was developed, from the design of the technology to implementing some algorithm or other, and that is more difficult to know than talking to my eye doctor over there. And I think that there is a difference of how the values are hidden in the system.
But a system that is trained in a proper way, that have this multicultural background, in a way, it can recognize the person and discuss with them and notice what kind of value background they are. And it could react on that. So you say that the system would have very specific values, and you say that there could be a very kind of a large sector of different values in the people who are training. But it can also be trained to contain the kind of a sensitivity to the values that the people would be when it comes in. So they are these kind of things that would come in the equation as well.
Good.
One of the things about self-driving car, I can kind of give you the point that is really the difficult part in it. If you go and make a self-driving car, it is not about being able to drive on the road. That is actually pretty easy. So what is hard is to figure out what the other cars are doing and what the pedestrians are doing.
Yes.
So that's the hard part. It has to understand their values.
Yeah.
So when the pedestrian is standing on the crossroads, figuring out whether they would actually jump into the road, they are watching at you.
Yeah.
And if you are the driver, you know this, okay, he has noticed me, now I can go on. And now it seems that he wants to go first, or she wants to go first, I will stop.
Yeah.
So this combination, communication on the system has to happen on the self-driving car as well. They have to be pretty much clever than just driving it.
Yes.
And the other part, which is even harder, which the self-driving car has to figure out, is to how to drive in a way that people understand and predict how you will drive. So it's not only kind of when you drive, it's communication, it's two-way communication. You have to be able to drive in a setting that you fit into the traffic. And that traffic is different in India, and that traffic is different in Sweden. Yeah. And if you build the car, it has exactly the same dilemma you were saying. How you take a car that is self-driving, you decide, I will drive around the world. And I first go to Sweden, then I go to Germany, and then I go to Italy, perhaps, and then I go to Turkey, so it's even more O's. And then it goes on in the system. You end up in India and driving around, and it's totally different. Yeah. And now the question, how you build this one in? Again, I say you have to train it to work in all of those cases. And this is how you make a multi-valued system that actually kind of solves it. But it is a very good example because it opens up the case of discussion. Where are the values and whose values you are?
And if the values there are fuzzy, then you have a problem with the decision rule. So then you might have an accident in Turkey.
Can I just cite a comment from our digital audience, from Heidi, who is saying, and if I may, the issue is about being transparent and explicit about these values.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yes.
It's spot on. Yeah.
Spot on, Heidi. Yeah. More comments or questions? And I cannot see one in the chat either.